I used to believe I had everything figured out. At 39, I had built a stable career as a psychologist, the kind of job that allowed me to untangle the complexities of others' minds, though my own life had its share of complications. My son Adrian was the brightest part of my world, a fiery 19-year-old with a love for speed and adventure. From the moment he first climbed onto a bicycle, his connection to anything with wheels seemed almost predestined. His passion for motorcycles wasn't just a passing phase. It was his calling. Adrian's father, my ex-husband, provided him with his first bike. Though we had parted ways years ago, he remained involved in Adrian's life, particularly when it came to supporting his dreams. He had the financial means to indulge Adrian's ambitions, and while I sometimes resented the imbalance between us, I was grateful that Adrian didn't have to sacrifice his passion. I still remember the day he brought home that gleaming Yamaha, his grin so wide it could have lit up the sky. It was a moment of pure joy, one I cherished even though I harbored a mother's natural apprehensions. I worried endlessly about his safety, knowing the risks involved in racing, but Adrian had a stubborn streak he inherited from both his parents. Once his mind was set, there was no changing it. Life had a rhythm to it, a predictable balance between my work and Adrian's training. Our conversations often took place over late-night dinners, his stories full of the excitement of the track, while I tried to sneak in gentle reminders about safety. He'd laugh, his confidence unwavering, and say, "Mom, you worry too much. I've got this." And I wanted to believe him. But there was a part of me that felt the weight of our bond growing heavier with time. It wasn't just the closeness that came with being a single parent and her only child. It was something deeper, something I didn't dare name. That Saturday began like any other, a lazy morning spent catching up on emails and sipping coffee while Adrian tinkered with his motorcycle in the garage. The low hum of his tools buzzed through the house, a comforting backdrop to my quiet routine. When he finally appeared in the doorway, his hair messy and his hands stained with grease, I looked up from my laptop and smiled. "What's on your mind?" I asked, noticing the mischievous glint in his eye. "Come with me for a ride." I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. "What? You've never been on a motorcycle, have you?" he said, leaning casually against the doorframe. "You're always saying you don't understand why I love it so much." "Let me show you." My heart stuttered. "Adrian, I don't know. It sounds dangerous." He laughed, the kind of deep, easy laugh that always made me feel simultaneously exasperated and endeared. "Mom, I'll drive carefully. Promise. You trust me, right?" His confidence was disarming. I could feel myself wavering, even as every instinct urged me to refuse. But there was something in his eyes, an eagerness I hadn't seen in a while. He wanted to share this part of himself with me, and as much as it scared me, I couldn't say no. "All right," I said hesitantly. "But only if you promise not to go too fast." His face lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. "Deal." I watched as Adrian wheeled the motorcycle out of the garage, the sunlight glinting off its polished body. It looked sleek and powerful, a perfect match for him. He handed me a helmet, and as I fastened the strap beneath my chin, I tried to steady my nerves. Adrian climbed onto the bike first, his movements fluid and assured. There was something undeniably magnetic about the way he carried himself, focused, composed, and commanding. "Ready?" he asked, glancing back at me with a crooked grin. Not remotely, I thought, but I nodded anyway. "Ready." I swung a leg over and settled onto the seat behind him, wrapping my arms around his waist. The closeness was unfamiliar, and I was hyper-aware of every sensation: the warmth of his body through his jacket, the rumble of the engine beneath us, the faint scent of leather and cologne. "Hold on tight," he said over his shoulder, and I did. The first few minutes were nerve-wracking. As the bike pulled out onto the road, I clutched Adrian as though my life depended on it, my knuckles white against his jacket. But gradually, the fear gave way to something else: exhilaration. The wind whipped against my face, cool and invigorating. The world blurred past us, a rush of colors and sounds that made my pulse quicken in a way I hadn't felt in years. Adrian kept his promise, driving carefully, but there was still an undeniable thrill to the ride. At one point, he turned onto a quieter, tree-lined road, and the pace slowed. I loosened my grip slightly, taking in the scenery. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the asphalt, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt completely present. "How are you doing back there?" Adrian called, his voice muffled by the hum of the engine. "Better than I expected," I shouted back, laughing. We stopped at a scenic overlook, where the road curved around a hilltop, offering a breathtaking view of the valley below. Adrian cut the engine, and the sudden quiet felt almost surreal. I slid off the bike, my legs trembling slightly, and pulled off my helmet. My hair was a mess, but I didn't care. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" Adrian teased, leaning against the bike with a grin. "No," I admitted, still catching my breath. "It was incredible." He handed me a water bottle from his backpack, his movements unhurried. "See, I told you I'd take care of you." There was something in the way he said it, so casual yet so full of meaning, that made my chest tighten. I looked at him, at the way the wind had tousled his hair and the way his eyes glinted with quiet satisfaction, and I felt a strange warmth I couldn't quite name. The ride back was quieter, more contemplative. I held on to Adrian with less urgency this time, feeling a newfound trust in both him and the experience. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I didn't want to let go. "You're a natural," he said as he helped me off the bike. "We'll make a rider out of you yet." I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't hide my smile. "Don't push your luck." That night, as we sat together on the couch, something felt different. The air between us was lighter, more relaxed, but also charged with a kind of intimacy that was new and unspoken. He leaned against the armrest, scrolling through his phone, while I sipped tea and watched him out of the corner of my eye. "You're staring," he said without looking up, a teasing lilt in his voice. "No, I'm not," I replied too quickly. He grinned, his eyes meeting mine. "Sure you're not." I laughed, shaking my head. But deep down, I knew something had shifted between us. That simple ride, with all its thrill and vulnerability, had brought us closer in a way I hadn't expected. And I wasn't sure what to make of it. That night, I tossed and turned beneath the covers, my thoughts tangled in a web of excitement and unease. The sensation of the ride, the closeness I had felt as I held onto Adrian, lingered like a pleasant ache. It wasn't just the thrill of the motorcycle that had my heart racing, it was the way he looked at me, the way his voice carried a weight of confidence and care. I couldn't decide what unsettled me more, the feelings themselves or the fact that I didn't entirely want to push them away. I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, his laughter and the rush of the wind echoing faintly in my dreams. I woke to the faint sound of music filtering through the house, cheerful and upbeat, with a pulsing rhythm that instantly lifted the morning haze. My curiosity piqued. I slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway, the scent of something delicious drawing me toward the kitchen. There he was, Adrian, dancing as if the world wasn't watching, a spatula in one hand and a pan in the other. His movements were unself-conscious and fluid, his grin wide and boyish as he sang along to the music. "Good morning," he called over his shoulder, catching sight of me leaning against the doorway with a bemused smile. "Morning," I said, crossing my arms as I took in the scene. "What's all this?" "Breakfast," he said simply, flipping a pancake with an unnecessary flourish. "I figured you could use some energy after yesterday. Riding takes it out of you, doesn't it?" I chuckled, the knot of tension in my chest easing at his light-heartedness. "Maybe a little. I'll admit I'm impressed. I didn't know you could cook." He shot me a playful wink. "There's a lot you don't know about me, Mom. I'm full of surprises." He wasn't wrong. I noticed the box on the couch then, wrapped in matte black paper with a sleek red ribbon. "What's that?" I asked, nodding toward it. Adrian's grin widened. "Your surprise," he said, setting the spatula down and wiping his hands on a towel. "Go on, open it." I hesitated, a flicker of apprehension mingling with curiosity as I crossed the room and sat on the edge of the couch. The box was lighter than I expected, but there was a weight to the moment that I couldn't ignore. I untied the ribbon and peeled back the paper, my breath catching when I saw what was inside. A sleek leather motorcycle jacket and matching pants, their supple texture and intricate stitching speaking to their quality. The dark material was accented with subtle silver detailing, and the faint scent of leather filled the air as I lifted the jacket from the box. "You got this for me?" I asked, turning to him with wide eyes. Adrian leaned against the counter, his arms crossed and a satisfied look on his face. "Course. You looked like a natural yesterday, so I thought you should have the gear to match. Besides," he added with a smirk, "you'll need it for today." "Today? I'm teaching you how to ride," he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. I wanted to protest, to say it was too much, but the excitement in his expression was infectious. As I stood there holding the jacket, I felt a warmth spread through me, a mix of gratitude and something deeper. Adrian's thoughtfulness was overwhelming, and I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes lingered on me, filled with an affection that made my heart ache in the best possible way. He stepped closer, gently taking the jacket from my hands and holding it up for me to try on. "Come on, let's see how it fits." I slipped my arms through the sleeves, the cool leather molding to my skin as though it had been made for me. Adrian adjusted the collar, his fingers brushing my neck briefly, sending a spark of something unnameable through me. "Perfect," he said, his voice soft. I looked up at him, and for a moment neither of us spoke. There was a closeness in the air, a quiet understanding that didn't need words. His gaze held mine, steady and searching, and I felt my cheeks grow warm. "Thank you," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Anything for you," he replied, his tone gentle but sure. We spent the morning in the open field near the edge of town, Adrian guiding me through the basics with patience and encouragement. He stood behind me as I gripped the handlebars, his hands covering mine as he explained how to control the throttle. His voice was calm and steady, his presence grounding. "You've got this," he said, his breath warm against my ear. "Just trust yourself and me." And I did. With every cautious turn, every hesitant start and stop, I felt myself growing more confident. Adrian's cheers of approval and his reassuring smiles kept me going, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known I was missing. By the time we returned home, the sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and lavender. I was exhausted but exhilarated, my face sore from smiling. As we sat on the porch with cold drinks in hand, Adrian looked over at me, his expression soft and contemplative. "You did amazing today," he said, his voice low. "Thanks to you," I replied, meeting his gaze. There was a pause, the kind that felt full rather than empty. His eyes lingered on mine, and I didn't look away. I didn't want to. In that moment, everything else faded. The doubts, the worries, the questions I couldn't yet answer. All that remained was us. The pause between us stretched, heavy with unspoken meaning. The evening air was cool, but I felt a warmth radiating from Adrian, from the connection that had been growing between us in ways I couldn't fully understand, or admit to myself. His gaze softened, his eyes holding mine as if searching for something I wasn't sure I could give. "It's been a while since I've seen you like this," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Happy. Free." I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. He wasn't wrong. Those moments on the bike, with the wind rushing past and his steady guidance grounding me, had unlocked something I hadn't felt in years. But it wasn't just the ride. It was him. "Thank you," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "For today, for everything." He smiled, the corners of his lips curving in a way that made my heart skip a beat. "You don't have to thank me. I just want to see you smile more, Mom. You deserve that." The way he said it, the way he looked at me, it made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in so long. My chest tightened, and before I could second-guess myself, I reached out and placed my hand over his. His fingers were warm beneath mine, strong and reassuring, just like him. "You're a good man, Adrian," I said softly. "I'm so proud of you." His hand turned beneath mine, his fingers curling gently around my own. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine, and I felt the world slow, the sounds of the evening fading into the background. "Mom," he murmured, his voice thick with something I couldn't name but felt deep in my chest. "You're everything to me. You know that, right?" I nodded, my throat tight. The sincerity in his eyes, the way his voice carried both strength and vulnerability, it overwhelmed me. And then, without warning, the space between us disappeared. It was just a light brush of his lips against mine, tentative and fleeting, but it sent a jolt through me that left me breathless. The world seemed to stop in that moment, the air charged with a mixture of warmth, confusion, and something dangerously intoxicating. He pulled back almost immediately, his eyes wide and searching my face for a reaction. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his voice trembling. I don't know why I didn't let him finish. My hand reached for his, holding it tightly, though my own heart was racing. "Adrian," I began, struggling to find the right words. I don't know what's happening here." He exhaled shakily, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Me neither," he admitted. "I just know that when I'm with you it feels different. And I don't know if that's okay, but I can't ignore it." His vulnerability hit me like a wave, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one vying for my attention, but none loud enough to drown out the truth I couldn't deny. I didn't want to pull away. I placed a hand on his cheek, guiding his eyes back to mine. "We need to figure this out," I said softly, my voice trembling but resolute. "But we can't rush into anything. This is complicated." He nodded, his jaw tight, though his eyes held a flicker of hope. "No. I don't want to ruin anything between us. I needed you to know." His honesty left me speechless. I'd spent so much time worrying about his safety on the track, his future as a racer, and his emotional well-being after the divorce, that I hadn't stopped to think about what he might be holding back, about what I might be feeling myself. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the weight of our emotions hanging between us. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft purple glow in its wake, and the first stars began to twinkle overhead. "I think," I began carefully, "that we should take this one step at a time. No expectations. Just honesty. Can we do that?" He nodded, his fingers tightening around mine. "I can do that," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his expression. "As long as I don't lose you." "You'll never lose me," I assured him, my voice firm even as my heart quaked. "We're in this together, Adrian. Whatever this is." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the memory of his kiss replayed in my mind. It wasn't just the act itself that left me shaken. It was the depth of emotion behind it, the way it seemed to hold a lifetime of unspoken feelings. And despite the turmoil of my thoughts, I couldn't deny the warmth it brought me, the sense of being wanted, cherished, in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years. The next morning, the tension between us was gone, replaced by an easy closeness that felt both familiar and new. Adrian greeted me with a warm smile as I entered the kitchen, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. "Morning," he said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs and toast across the counter toward me. "How'd you sleep?" "Well enough," I said, taking a seat and meeting his gaze. There was a quiet understanding in his eyes, as though we'd silently agreed to let the night before settle, to give ourselves time. He joined me at the table, his presence as comforting as the sunlight streaming through the window. And as we sat there, sharing breakfast and unspoken promises, I couldn't help but think that, for the first time in a long time, the path ahead, though uncertain, didn't feel so daunting. After breakfast, Adrian leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the table as he regarded me with a thoughtful expression. His relaxed demeanor held a kind of quiet confidence, as though he was working through an idea that excited him. "What?" I asked, curious about the little smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I was thinking, how about we go somewhere special today? There's this spot I found a while back while riding, and I think you'd love it. It's better at sunset. His words sent a flutter through me, though I tried to mask it with a smile. Sunset sounds beautiful. I'd love to see it. His grin widened, the kind that made his boyish charm and mature confidence collide in a way that left me feeling slightly unsteady. Great. It's a bit of a drive, but it's worth it. Trust me. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. I wasn't sure what made this particular outing feel so significant, but I could sense it in the air between us. Adrian had an energy about him that was both playful and deliberate, like he had something planned that he was eager to share. When he wheeled the bike out of the garage, he patted the seat with a knowing smile. "You ready for round 2, Mom?" I laughed, slipping on the leather jacket he'd given me the day before. "You're lucky I trust you as much as I do. You won't regret it," he said confidently, his tone carrying a warmth that made me believe him. The ride was breathtaking. Adrian chose winding backroads lined with towering trees that created a canopy of golden light as the sun began its slow descent. The air was crisp, and I couldn't help but smile at the sheer beauty of the journey. When he finally pulled off the main road onto a dirt path, I tightened my grip around his waist, my curiosity piqued. "Where are you taking me?" I called over the sound of the engine. "You'll see," he replied, his voice teasing but reassuring. We arrived just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The bike came to a stop near a small clearing that overlooked a sprawling valley, the view so stunning it felt almost otherworldly. I slipped off the bike, staring in awe at the scene before me. "Adrian," I breathed, turning to him. "This is incredible." He took off his helmet, shaking out his hair before flashing me a smile. "I thought you'd like it. Come on." He guided me to the edge of the clearing, where the ground dropped off into a soft slope leading to the valley below. The world felt quiet and still, the only sounds the gentle rustle of the breeze and the distant chirping of birds settling in for the night. As we stood there, Adrian slid an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. The gesture was so natural, so intimate, that I didn't think to question it. I rested my head lightly against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat as we watched the sun sink lower. "This," he murmured, his voice low and thoughtful, "is the kind of moment that makes everything else fade away. Don't you think?" I nodded, unable to find words that could match the emotion swelling in my chest. His warmth, his presence, the beauty of the sunset, it all blended into something almost overwhelming. After a long, quiet moment, Adrian shifted slightly, reaching into his jacket pocket. "I wanted to give you something," he said, his voice tinged with nervous excitement. I turned to him, surprised, as he pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a delicate pendant on a silver chain. The charm was a small, intricately crafted sunburst, its center set with a tiny amber gemstone that seemed to catch and hold the fading light of the evening. "Adrian," I whispered, my throat tightening. "It's beautiful. I saw it and thought of you," he said simply, his eyes locking onto mine. "The sun. Strong, warm, and constant. You." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I reached out to touch the pendant, my fingers brushing his. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently, his tone firm but tender. "You've done so much for me, Mom. You deserve to have something that reminds you of how incredible you are." I felt a lump rise in my throat as he moved behind me, his fingers brushing the nape of my neck as he fastened the chain. The pendant rested just above my heart, its weight slight but comforting. "Perfect," he said softly, stepping back around to face me. His eyes lingered on mine, filled with something deeper than pride, deeper than affection. The intensity of his gaze made my pulse quicken, and I felt my breath catch. "Thank you," I managed, my voice trembling. "For everything." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face, his touch lingering for just a moment longer than it should have. "Always," he murmured. The silence between us was heavy, charged with emotions neither of us could name. And yet, in that moment, it felt as though nothing else in the world existed. His confidence, his care, the unspoken connection we shared, it was all laid bare beneath the fading light of the sunset. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, his arms came around me again, holding me tightly as if to anchor us both in the moment. And as the sky darkened into twilight, I found myself leaning into him, letting go of the doubts and questions that had been swirling in my mind. In his embrace I felt safe, loved,